The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the dense forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the acrid smell of gunpowder that had lingered in Sergeant Daniel Carter's nostrils for weeks. He crouched low behind a fallen tree, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands. Around him, the men of Bravo Company were scattered, their faces grim and their movements deliberate. They had been on the move for days, pushing deeper into enemy territory, and the weight of exhaustion was beginning to show. Daniel glanced at his watch. 20-30 hours. Nightfall would be their ally, but it also brought its own dangers. The forest, so quiet now, could erupt into chaos at any moment. He signaled to his squad to hold their positions, then motioned for Corporal James "Jimmy" O'Reilly to join him. Jimmy, a wiry man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, crawled over, his eyes scanning the tree-line. "What's the plan, Sarge?" Jimmy whispered, his voice barely audible. Daniel hesitated. The mission was clear: secure the bridge at Miller's Crossing and hold it until reinforcements arrived. But the intelligence they had received was sketchy at best. The enemy was known to be in the area, but their numbers and positions were unknown. Daniel knew that one wrong move could cost them everything. "We move at 2,100, Daniel said finally. "Stay low, stay quiet. We'll approach from the east and set up a perimeter. If we're lucky, we'll catch them off guard." Jimmy nodded, his expression unreadable. He had been with Daniel since the beginning, through the hellish battles and the endless marches. They had lost too many good men along the way, and the thought of losing more weighed heavily on both of them. As the minutes ticked by, Daniel's mind wandered. He thought of home, of his wife, Emily, and their young daughter, Lily. He had promised them he would come back, but the longer the war dragged on, the harder that promise was to keep. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. There would be time for memories later if they survived the night. At precisely 2,100 hours, Daniel gave the signal. The squad moved out, their movements slow and deliberate. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle of the wind a potential ambush. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. His men were counting on him. They reached the edge of the forest just as the moon broke through the clouds, casting a pale light over the landscape. The bridge was visible in the distance, a narrow structure spanning a fast-moving river. It was a strategic point, the only crossing for miles, and Daniel knew the enemy would be watching it closely. "All right, listen up," Daniel whispered, gathering his men around him. "We'll split into 2 teams. Jimmy, take red team and flank to the left. I'll take blue team and go right. We'll meet at the bridge and set up defensive positions. Remember, no shooting unless absolutely necessary. We need the element of surprise." The men nodded, their faces set with determination. They moved out, each team taking a different path toward the bridge. Daniel led blue team through a shallow ravine, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness. The tension was palpable, each step bringing them closer to the unknown. They were halfway to the bridge when the first shot rang out. Daniel dropped to the ground, his heart racing. The sound had come from the direction of red team. He cursed under his breath, knowing that their cover was blown. He signaled to his men to take cover, then peered over the edge of the ravine. In the distance, he could see flashes of light, muzzle fire. The enemy had found them. "Stay down," Daniel hissed, his mind racing. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they couldn't retreat. The bridge was too important. He had to think fast. "Thompson, Morales, cover me," Daniel ordered, pointing to 2 of his men. "The rest of you, stay here and provide covering fire. We're going to flank them." The 2 soldiers nodded, their faces pale but determined. Daniel took a deep breath, then sprinted toward the bridge, Thompson and Morales close behind. Bullets whizzed past them, kicking up dirt and debris, but they kept moving. They reached the bridge just as a grenade exploded nearby, the force of the blast knocking Daniel off his feet. He scrambled to his feet, his ears ringing. The bridge was chaos. Red team was pinned down and the enemy was closing in. Daniel spotted Jimmy crouched behind a pile of rubble, his rifle trained on the advancing soldiers. "Jimmy!" Daniel shouted, ducking behind a concrete barrier. "We need to hold them off until reinforcements arrive." Jimmy nodded, his face grim. "We're running low on ammo, Sarge. We can't hold them for long." Daniel clenched his fists, his mind racing. They were out of options. He glanced at the river below, the water rushing swiftly. It was a desperate move, but it might be their only chance. "Listen up," Daniel shouted, addressing his men. "We're going to blow the bridge. Thompson, Morales, set the charges. The rest of you, cover them." The men moved quickly, their training kicking in. Thompson and Morales began placing explosives on the bridge's supports, while the rest of the squad provided covering fire. The enemy was relentless. Their bullets ricocheting off the concrete and steel. Daniel could feel the pressure mounting, the seconds ticking away. "Charges set," Thompson yelled, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. "Fall back," Daniel ordered, his heart pounding. "Everyone fall back." The squad retreated, their movements frantic as they scrambled to safety. Daniel was the last to leave, his eyes fixed on the bridge. He pressed the detonator, and a deafening explosion rocked the night. The bridge collapsed into the river, the sound of twisting metal and rushing water filling the air. For a moment, there was silence. The enemy had been stopped, but at a cost. Daniel looked around at his men, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. They had survived, but the war was far from over. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Daniel allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of Emily and Lily, of the promise he had made. He didn't know if he would ever see them again, but he knew he had to keep fighting for them, for his men, and for the hope of a better tomorrow. The echoes of the battle faded into the distance, replaced by the sounds of the forest coming to life. Daniel took a deep breath, then turned to his men. "Let's move out," he said, his voice steady. "We've got a long way to go."